Hello, everyone. I'm Kaitlin Statz, and thank you for coming to the second audio drama roundtable discussion, this time on production, the logistics of podcasting. And the first thing I'd like to do is we're going to have everybody go through and introduce themselves. So just say your name and your podcast, and that way we can kind of have a who's who while we're going into the discussions later on. We're also going to have two presentations today. After the presentations, we'll go through the Q&A for both presentations. So if you have any questions, go ahead and put them in the chat, and then we'll address it at the end of both presentations based on when you put the question in. After that, we'll open up into a larger discussion. That way we can try and bounce some ideas off each other and generally create a good resource for the community. Thank you again for all for coming, and we're going to start with, and I know nobody has the same order as me on the screen, but we're going to start with Brandon.
Hi, I'm Brandon Kroos. A million years ago, I was one of the lead writers for the Second Shift podcast. I'm currently working on an audio drama called The Ordinary Epic. We're hoping to launch sometime in the next month. Whenever I give an actual release date, I'm hilariously wrong, so I won't do that, but soon.
All right. Colton?
Hello, my name is Colton Flick. I was a writer and voice actor and a couple of other things for the Magical History of Knox County. And I'm also a writer for the show Still Lives, which will release next week, actually.
Oh, okay, cool. Raul.
Yo, what's up, guys? My name is Raul Vega. I am the producer, composer, writer, showrunner, everything that is Rose Drive. And this is actually convenient, perfect timing because I'm knee deep in production right now. So this is like almost like it's perfect. So thank you for having me here.
Absolutely. And a new face for me, Rochelle.
Hi, I am Rochelle Breen. I go by Rocky Breen in fiction writing, and I'm completely new to all this, so I'm here to learn. And I am working on a script submission for the Austin Film Festival. It's going to be a Thumbelina Alice in Wonderland mashup. That's all I have so far.
Okay.
Thanks for having me.
Travis, who is also our recorder for this session.
Hi, I'm Travis Vengroff. I produce and edit and do sound design for The White Vault, Liberty, Dark Dice, and soon Vast Horizon.
All right, and then our first presenter today is going to be Jared, who's going to introduce himself, and then we'll do our second presenter.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jared Smith, and I am the writer, producer, director of The Phenomenon audio drama. Currently 2 seasons in, season 3 on the way.
All right, and last but not least, we have Jeff.
Hi, I'm Jeff Clement. I'm a producer and actor with the No Sleep podcast primarily, and I'm excited to be a part of this today.
All right. Thank you everyone for coming. And if Jared is ready, we can roll right into the first presentation and try not to hold on to everybody for like 3 hours because the last one went on for a while.
I am ready.
All right, go for it.
Okay, so is that working?
Yes.
Okay. Just to start things off, this is my first time going through this deck with an audience, so bear with me if I get lost a little bit, but I think I'll be okay. And also, kind of, I approached this presentation. I know a lot of the people in the roundtable right now have a lot of experience producing audio dramas. They have, a variety of experiences, but I kind of approached this presentation with keeping in mind people who might just be starting, people who might not know kind of exactly what details they need to be thinking about, and how they can get started doing it, or what even kind of what producing an audio drama actually means. So a lot of this stuff that I might cover might be commonplace to some of the people participating in this roundtable, but I think it's all worthy of discussion. So here we go. So very briefly, a little bit about me for people who don't know me. My name is Jared J. Smith. I'm the producer, director, editor of The Phenomenon, but I've also been a video, audio, film producer, editor, director for over 10 years now, over a decade. And in that time, I've produced things kind of all sizes, things with a huge range of budgets, both with zero budget, a larger budget, and kind of that experience has kind of trained me to, produce an audio drama. Like I said, in that time, I kind of learned how to think creatively about production, how to stretch a dollar, and how to kind of really make the most out of resources. And most relevantly, I'm the producer of the phenomenon. So there we go. So that's a little bit about me. So I'm going to talk a little bit about producing and kind of talk about that through the lens of my experience producing both a variety of things over the years, but more specifically, most relevantly, producing the phenomenon. So I'll talk a little bit about kind of how we approach things. So what we'll be discussing, what I'll be talking about is, everything from the end of the writing process through having a finished product. Taking that realized idea and turning it into a finished product that people are ready to listen to. We're going to talk about pre-production, casting, and production and post-production from a producer's perspective. What I'm not going to touch on is the writing process, marketing, and details of other roles. The writing process is obviously a topic all of its own. I'm sure one day it will have a roundtable devoted just to that. And the same thing with marketing, so we can get to having something that's ready to be listened to, but then getting someone to actually listen to it is a whole nother thing. So that's kind of a topic of itself. So I'm not going to go into that. And I'm not going to really go into too much of other roles like audio designer, director, things like that. We're obviously going to touch on that stuff from a producer's perspective, but in terms of how to design audio or how to direct actors, we're not going to touch too much on that kind of stuff. Pre-production. I have a story I want to tell. So now what? When you have a fully realized story, idea, whatever that fully realized thing is, and you're now ready to get into production, start developing that. What are you going to do? So much of producing is pre-producing. The kind of the idea behind production is to, pre-production is building that machine that you're going to turn on when it's time for production to happen. So production should be this well-oiled machine already that just knows how to work and knows how to do what it's supposed to do. And so much of producing is building that machine and making sure that everything works, making sure that any problems you might find in advance are already solved. It's the most important step in making sure that everything in production and post goes smoothly. It's the foundation that production process is built on. So yeah, pre-pro is generating answers in advance to every possible question that you can ask yourself about production. It's generating solutions to every potential problem. Thinking about everything that you need to do and thinking about everything that could possibly go wrong and thinking about everything that's going to need to happen to get from A to B. The way that I love to think about production is when you're at the very, very beginning, you think about where you want to be at the very, very end. And then you think about all of the millions of things that have to happen in between that. And it really is a number. And you can really figure out, okay, here are all of these things. And if you really think about it and really do your homework, you can go through that list and you can check off everything that's going to happen between A and Z. Pre-production is asking yourself all of these questions in advance before you even get started. Who's your cast going to be? Where are you recording? How are you recording? Do you have the right equipment? How are you handling post? Are you thinking of absolutely everything? So before you start doing anything, it's important to ask yourself tons of these questions. Figure out a plan for every step in advance so that you can find any potential hangups before they happen. Before we get into that, a quick note on writing. A lot of this can kind of seem a little overwhelming to people who might not have done it, who might be doing it for the first time. And it's important to remember that your production scope is within your control. If you're planning on, if you don't want to have a production that has a million things to do and you want to have a production that's a little more contained, that maybe has a smaller cast, that maybe is a little easier to produce, or at least has fewer things to think about, you have that under your control. If you're the writer or if you're the person who's choosing what story you're developing or what story you're going to bring to life. So even though writing and development isn't really part of the pre-production process, if production is intimidating to you, it's something that you can think about at that point in time. If I don't have too much experience producing these things, if I don't know everything that I need to think about along the way, what story can I tell that's going to maximize the strengths I have, that's going to keep the scope of production limited to a size that I feel comfortable handling. So even though writing's not really part of that, you can approach writing with your pre-production, production, post strategy in mind. And then of course, if you feel like you can tackle anything, or you feel like you have the experience to really do anything, then you can approach writing development kind of no holds barred. You can go for it and say, I'm going to tell the story I want to tell, and I'm not really going to let anything hold me back from telling that. I'll figure out the production problems later. And that's kind of what we did with the phenomenon. So for the phenomenon, which I also wrote, I didn't want to limit myself in the writing process. So I wrote the story I wanted to write. I wrote the first season of the show. And then when it came time to produce something, we had 40 actors. We had something with tons of sound design, tons of moving parts. And I thought to myself, maybe I should scale this down. But I thought, the more I thought about it, I thought, no, let's go for it. I have the experience to do this. This is something that we can bring to life. But I felt like because I had that producing experience, it was okay. But for people who feel like that production process might be a little more intimidating, you can choose your stories wisely in writing. You have your story, you're ready to tell, and you're going to start putting some things together. So first things first, where are we going to record this? There are a few different options for what you can do. You can record in a studio, you can record remotely. So sending lines to actors, having people record things, themselves, and putting all of those things together in post, or you can kind of record at home or in another space where you can bring actors together. These are all totally fine, great options. And a lot of these decisions that you're going to make are going to be what fits your specific situation best. So if you have the means to record in a studio, that's fantastic. Studio can be a wonderful place with professional people who know how to get the best recordings. It can be a space where the sound in the room is prepared to get the best sound options possible. But studios can often be expensive. And for people who are producing audio dramas, a lot of these are produced independently on a shoestring budget. So a lot of times people need to be a little more creative than that. So studio, wonderful option. But for people who want to go in a different direction, recording remotely or recording together in a different space, which I'm calling at home. Now, if you're going to record remotely, what questions do you need to ask yourself? So much of pre-production is just kind of asking yourself questions and figuring out those answers and figuring out those solutions. So if you're going to record remotely, what equipment is everyone going to use to remote? What's the direction that you can kind of best provide to your actors to have them prepare their space, get the best sound quality possible? What you're going to want to do is have these recordings coming together that are uniform in a way that a sound designer or a sound mixer can combine these different recordings in a way that sounds like everyone's in the same space, everyone is sharing the scene. So just thinking about, if one person is in this loud, echoey space and one person is in this very dead room, you're going to have issues doing that. So it's about thinking, okay, what do I need to tell my actors? What do I need to tell the talent to get them all uniform in a way that we're going to be able to use this stuff to its maximum ability in post-production? Or you can record kind of what I'm calling at home. The questions that you're going to ask yourself: what equipment are you using? Is this space quiet enough? How does it sound? Is it comfortable for the cast and crew? What can you do to make the space as ideal as possible? How loud are your neighbors? Because these are things that may seem like little details, but are things that can be a huge monkey wrench in the production process later on. If you already have it in a solution to your loud neighbors in advance, then it's not going to become a problem later. It's about embracing creative solutions. And when you're kind of on a shoestring budget, this is where things can sometimes get pretty fun. To take a step back and think to yourself, okay, we have a big goal that we're trying to accomplish. What can we do to try to have a space that works for everybody, have a space that's going to create the sound that we need, look back and think and see what your potential solutions could be. And for the phenomenon, I was also the director of the phenomenon. And as the director, I was adamant that I wanted to have a space that we could put multiple actors in, where actors could fit in there, they could go through a scene together, thereby, at least from my point of view as the director of this production, maximizing kind of the performances that they might be able to give us. Also have this space sound good, have a nice dead sound without reverb that we can use to maximize in post-production and put these performances in any kind of post-audio space that we want to. So what we came up with was building in my living room a sound booth 8 feet tall, 8 feet long, 4 feet deep, where multiple actors could go in there. And here's pictures of this. This is, the picture of what the booth looks like from the outside, picture what the booth looks like from the inside. And this is something that my sound designer and I, mostly he kind of drew up, and then together we built. And this is plywood from Home Depot, 2x4s from Home Depot, canvas from a local canvas store. And this soundproofing on the inside is soundproofing that a local recording studio that was renovating was getting rid of. And we were able to kind of swing by and take this off of their hands, stuff that they were going to kind of just get rid of anyway. So we were able to build this entire booth in my living room. And this booth gave us the flexibility to record actors on a super flexible schedule in a space that sounded really, really wonderful, and in a space that was big enough that multiple people could fit in there and kind of do whatever they needed to do. This picture on the left is one of our actors on the right, and then actually me. And what we would do in there is, a lot of the times the people would run through the scenes, and then I would go in there and we would, because it's an action show, there's all kinds of breathing and grunts and things like that we have to get. So we would kind of go through these action scenes in there together too, to get these really fun sounds from our actors. And it was a space big enough to do that and play and have fun. So this is kind of a nice example that I like to use of thinking creatively and thinking creatively in the production and pre-production process, and thinking, hey, we can't afford a studio, so maybe we can't do this. Well, what if we can kind of think outside the box and bring the studio to us? And this is what we did. So recording space, whatever your solution is, if you're going to record in a studio or your own home space, or if you're going to record everybody remotely, once you have those questions answered, the next question that you're going to ask yourself is casting. All right, who's going to bring all these characters to life? Now, this might be a very easy question to answer. It might be there's one person in the cast, and it's going to be you. So great. Or it might be there's 100 people, and you have to make a process out of this and figure out how you're going to fill all these roles. Questions that you're going to want to ask yourself: how many people do you need? And how are you finding the right people for these roles? In the phenomenon, when we were when I was done writing season 1, we had 40 speaking roles. And I thought to myself, that's way too many. We need to cut back on some of these speaking roles a lot. The producer in me was saying that. And then the director and writer in me was saying, well, let's not cut these back too quickly. Let's honestly ask myself, can we fill all these roles? Can we differentiate these voices in a way that the audience is going to be able to tell the difference between, who's speaking in one scene and who's speaking in another scene? And these are questions that you need to ask yourself, because if two characters sound exactly the same, then maybe you need to cast those differently, or maybe you need to eliminate one of those roles. You need to find a solution for things like that. So how many people do you need? How do you find the right people for these roles? What we did, a few of the roles were filled by me and people that we know, actors. and actors that we've worked with before. But most of the roles, about 35 of the 40 speaking roles, were filled by people that we cast specifically for this project. We took out a small ad in Backstage, it was an acting publication I'm sure everyone's familiar with, and it got Backstage is very popular in the acting community. If you're ever looking for good actors, Backstage is fantastic. And you can take out an ad for very, very inexpensive. And we got a ton of responses, and we're able to fill a lot of roles. We auditioned people in person here in New York. We found a little space, in an acting school that they would let us use in the evening. And we used that for a few evenings to bring in the people that on Backstage looked really great for these roles. And we're able to find exactly who we needed. It's about thinking, who do we need? And also thinking, who are the right people for roles and how are we finding them? And some other things that you're going to want to ask yourself is about like payment, because that can help finding people too. How much, if anything, are you paying the actors that are involved? Now, payment doesn't have to be necessary. It's not required that you pay someone, but I like to think about it like you have to show people that you have respect for their time and that you aren't taking advantage of the time that they're giving you. If people believe in the project that you're asking them to be a part of, and they believe that you are, sincerely bringing them on board to be part of something cool, and that you're not wasting their time and you're not taking advantage of them, people are, in my experience, are very, very generous with their time. We did try to pay people. We tried to pay people what we thought was fair. I'll say that our actors were very generous with their time, and they understood that we had a very, very small production budget. We thought it was important to, at least use payment as a gesture of showing, hey, we respect that your time, or respect that you're trying to be a part of this. But you can also kind of pay people with in-kind services. Maybe you have a skill that they need, so you're kind of trading time or other things. So payment can mean a lot of things to a lot of different people, but sometimes it's less about what the actual dollar amount is and more about, making sure that people are feeling respected and feeling like you're not wasting their time. Once you have your cast, kind of how can you prepare them for their role, for what they're about to go through? Now, some of this stuff treads into the director role a little bit, but producer role too. So how can you prepare them for getting into character? Do they have the lines in advance enough to prepare? If they're recording on Thursday, you don't want to give them their lines on Wednesday. You want to make sure that they have time to do the preparation that they need. Do they know the motivations of the character? Do they understand the situations, the details of what might be going on around them in the story? Part of the director and the producer's job is, making sure that the actors have everything that they need to succeed. You want them to be able to step into a space and step into a recording booth with some idea of what they're supposed to be doing. How can you prepare them for the logistic details that they need too? Does their actor know where they're going if they're coming to your place? Do they have the address? What do they need to bring? Do they need to memorize their lines or not? Some people haven't done audio dramas before and don't totally know how this works. How are they being credited? Will there be paperwork? A lot of these things are really great to let people know in advance. If you're going to sign a contract or a release form with them or something like that, you don't want to spring something on someone and say, oh, and I need you to sign this. Signing paperwork, sometimes people need to be in the right headspace for that. And if they know that they're going to have to do that in advance, it can make that go a lot easier. I think from a producer's point of view, in the days and weeks leading up to to a performance, we try to prepare the actors both for the performance, but also for the experience too. What do they need to know about this character, and what do they need to know about the situation that they're actually going to be walking into? Boring paperwork. Do I really need to do all this stuff? That's a good question. Some people do, some people don't. My feeling about releases, contracts, things like that is, you should have some kind of contract release form, even if you're working with friends. It's not just for you. These kind of things are for both parties, so they have a clear and documented expectation of what these recordings will be used for. It covers you legally, and it also clarifies what your talent, what your cast is entitled to. So for you, it really kind of gives you the peace of mind of knowing you have the rights to use these recordings, and that is clear right up front. So no one can say down the road, well, I didn't give you permission to use this. This paperwork helps cover you, and it also is for your cast as well. If you're paying your cast members, if you're doing in-kind services, whatever they're entitled to, if they're entitled to copies of the recording or the raw material or anything like that, that can be written into releases like this, or I'm sorry, into contract materials like this. So sometimes this boring paperwork isn't really what people like to think about, because it can be a little boring and a little intimidating, but it's definitely something that's good to have both for you and for your cast. And where do you get these things? I mean, the ideal place to get something like this is from a lawyer, but obviously lawyers cost a lot of money, and independent productions like this don't have a lot of money. Thankfully, we live in the internet age. There's LegalZoom. There are, tons of things online, tons of resources that you can use. Chances are you're not looking for a crazy custom contract. Chances are you're just looking for a pretty boilerplate contract that's showing what you're doing with the recordings and showing what the actor is entitled to. And those kind of boilerplate things are pretty easy to find on the internet, on LegalZoom, and even if you have to pay for them, they're very, very affordable as long as they're not custom made. So the boring paperwork, do I really need this stuff? I would say yes. It's good for all parties involved. Where do I get this stuff? The internet, or a lawyer if you can afford one. So now you have your cast, you know where you're recording, you're ready to do this. So scheduling, how long will this all take? So good question. Big picture. How long will production go on for? How much time do we need for post-production? Good questions. What we did for the phenomenon, we recorded I had written the entire season 1, and then we kind of did it in phases. So after writing, after pre-production, when we were kind of looking at scheduling, I left about 3 weeks for recording time, and we recorded in nights, weekends. Everybody works day jobs, so we couldn't record during the day too much. But I thought in that time I'll be able to get everything that I need. Now, how long will this production go on for has to do with the scope of your specific project, how you're recording, all of these other questions that you've already answered for yourself. That's what's going to determine that. And how much time do you need for post-production? That is a great conversation for you to have with whoever's doing the post-production, sound designer, sound engineer. And it's good to know if you're planning for your release date or planning for something in the future. How long are all of these phases going to last? Specifically, how much time do you need with each actor? Do certain actors need to be scheduled together? What about your crew? What about their schedule? You need to look at things both large in phases, but also on every specific day. Exactly what are we doing this day? Who's coming? How long do we need with them? How many lines do they have? Are they in one scene or are they in 20 scenes? Okay, if they're in one scene, then we know maybe we don't need them for that long. Maybe we should schedule them first and we can get them out of there. If they're there for 20 scenes, we don't want to start them last in the day or things like that. So again, this is all going to depend on all the answers that you've come up with leading up to this. And, do people need to be scheduled together? What about your crew? A lot of actors, people who are working on these things, they're probably working day jobs. They probably have busy lives. So it's important to leave enough time for scheduling. Google Docs is your friend. Be organized here, because especially when you're juggling a large cast, we had 40 people in season 1. That means 40 different schedules, 40 different jobs, 40 different busy lives that we needed to slot into a 3-4 week period. And if you're not organized, you can get lost in that. So it's important to ask a lot of these questions to yourself, stay organized, and be flexible. Production. We're recording. Like I said earlier, by the time you hit the production phase, if you're just serving as a producer here, a lot of your hard work is going to be done. This is you really pressing play on the machine that you've built and letting it run. Now, obviously, there are going to be problems. There are going to be things that are going to happen along the way. But at this point, the schedule is made. You know when people are coming, who's coming, where you're recording, how you're recording, what equipment you're using. So now it's just about kind of doing it. And at this point, as a producer, you're going to kind of take a step back. You're going to be there to problem solve, but you're going to let the director, the sound designer, do their thing. And that might also be you. You're gonna change hats in that mode. But something in production that I do think is helpful is staying organized and staying detail oriented. Detail each and everything you need recorded. Go through this is in advance of production. Go through your scenes. It's not just the dialogue that you need. It's the sound effects. It's breathing. It's, grunts and all kinds of things. Do people have a fight scene? Do they fall? Are they running? What does that breathing sound like? All kinds of different, whatever movement you can picture. So again, this is going into directing mode a little bit here, but I like to visualize all of these scenes. What do these scenes look like? Now, I know we're only hearing them, but if we're visualizing it, you can kind of know what other extra sounds you might need that go beyond just the voice performance. A lot of those sounds are going to come from the actors. A lot of those sounds might come from sound effects and different Foley things that you might do. But having a really detailed list in advance of every single thing that you're going to need is going to help production go a lot smoother. People aren't going to leave and you think, oh, we didn't get them doing this, or you're not going to find yourself in post-production saying, man, I really wish we had this person saying, having a deep sigh or something like that. If you know in advance and you can kind of just have your checklist of making sure all of those boxes are checked, it's going to make your life way easier down the road. And I know I touched on sound effects, but in production, it's not just about the voice actors and what you're doing in the booth either. There's a lot of sound libraries. Sound designer, sound engineer will know all about that. But it can also be about going out there and making some of these sounds yourself. Not every sound is perfect in a sound library. If you need the sound of a door closing, you can probably find that in a sound library 1,000 different ways. But if you need the sound of an alien coming out of a spaceship and it sounds, well, you probably have a very specific thing in your head about what that's supposed to sound like. So production is when you're playing around, getting these different sound effects and doing the things, getting things in the can that you can play with later. We did, for the phenomenon, we used libraries to a certain smaller extent for some things that we just knew we could get there. But most of the sounds we recorded ourselves. All of the footsteps, we recorded ourselves because from a director's perspective, I don't like how library footsteps sound. And I think authentically recorded ones sound a lot better, even though maybe they sound the same. I don't know, but I like the ones that we recorded. We recorded all of the footsteps ourselves. We recorded tons of the alien sounds ourselves, tons of the action sounds ourselves. And having that stuff in the can to be able to play with later is wonderful and also just fun. Go out there, bring a microphone, get wild sounds, and have a good time doing it. So that's production. Post-production, this is, all the finishing touches. Again, from a producer's perspective, a lot of this stuff is going to fall on the sound designer, on the person who, again, might be you. But in this presentation, producer's perspective, thinking about what are the things that you can be thinking about while this is being cut together, while this is being put together by the director and the sound designer. Does your post team have everything they need? The right equipment, software specs. It might not be your job to go in and use the software and cut these things together, but it is your job to make sure that everyone on your team has all of the resources that they need. So I think making sure that you're putting them in a situation where they can succeed is definitely your responsibility. You want to make sure the cast is comfortable during production. You want to make sure your crew is comfortable and has the resources always, and especially during post. Other things to think about: how are you distributing this? What are your naming conventions going to be? What about metadata? Things like that. These aren't things that you want to be thinking about the morning that you're going to click release on your RSS feed. These are things that you want to have a plan in advance of knowing, this is how we're going to distribute this. These are the details that I need. This is how it's going to be named, and all that kind of different stuff. There's tons of resources online everywhere. I guess this is very topical now with the Apple email that got sent out today, but naming conventions and metadata are things that you do need to think about, both on iTunes and on every other feed as well. So thanks. That's my presentation.
All right, thank you. Sorry, Travis had to unmute me and he lost where I was. But thank you so much. That was a great overview of production, and that's exactly what we were looking for, because we're looking for something that helps people who are just coming into audio drama for that first presentation being like, okay, what am I doing? How do I do it? Where do I even start?
Right.
That's a great first thing. So we do have a few questions, but like I said, we're going to save all the questions for after both of the presentations. So I'm going to go ahead and put a little line. If anybody has any questions for the next presentation, you can just continue to add them to the box and we'll go from there. And we're just going to keep rolling over and trying to make sure we get through the presentations in time. So we're going to go straight on over to Jeff. So introduce yourself and start again.
Hi. All right. Like I said, my name is Jeff Clement. I'm a producer with No Sleep Podcast. I'll get more into me in detail in just a second. But I just wanted to say, Jared, that was really an awesome presentation. And I'm actually really glad that I'm coming second, because you covered some stuff that I'm going to cover in my presentation, so I'll know what not to do in serious detail. But also, you're more of an overall producer, and I'm very much a post producer. So I think it's going to flavor what you're talking about quite nicely. We're going to dovetail quite nicely there. My role is very much clearly defined in kind of a hierarchy of things, and it's not so much being god of the show as it is keeping all the pieces stuck together. So I'm looking forward to having the chance to augment some of that presentation a little bit. So I'm going to attempt to share my screen, and hopefully it'll go okay. I have not, like Jared, I've not had a chance to present this at all. I worked on it basically up until about an hour ago. So hopefully I'm not talking over myself a million times, but we'll see. All right, so audio drama production. I should really say post-production, but I tend to think of it just as production in general. And I guess it really kind of depends on your show and how it's made. In some cases, you have a show like The Phenomenon, for example, or The White Vault, where you've got a lot of hands-on stuff happening. I tend to produce, with my role on the No Sleep Podcast being my kind of primary job these days, as far as my side gig goes, in very much a remote capacity. So plus, we are also producing our show on a weekly basis, which means that my availability to get out into the field and do recordings is nil, because I've got a day job and I got a family and I've got deadlines every single week. So I have to do everything from a post-production standpoint, and I have to kind of find that creativity that Jared was talking about, not so much in the how I record things, but how I basically work with whatever I can kind of find online to use as my tools. So I'll get right into the presentation. So who am I, in case you don't know? I'm a producer and voice actor. I'm a sound editor. I'm a sound designer, musician, composer. I try to be the jack of all trades. Sometimes to my detriment though. But primarily, at least in the audio world, I'm a No Sleep Podcast producer as well as voice actor. Now on the No Sleep Podcast, we also have two other full-time producers, Phil Michalski and Jesse Cornett. We all do the same job, and we divvy up our tasks. We produce roughly 2 to 3 hours of content every week. And that can equate to 1 to 2 projects per person per week, which is, roughly 15-minute to basically an hour-long audio production. Basically, usually have about 5 days to deliver that, as opposed to maybe 10 if we're really ahead of the game. I'm a contributor to other podcasts and series, including Congeria podcast. I appear as one of the main characters in that. I've also done some work with the Alexandria Archives, Hidden Frequencies, had a tiny little guest spot on Liberty, hoping to maybe eke my way onto the White Vault at some point, maybe. Small Town Horror, things like that. I know, people kind of in this sphere, even though I don't necessarily communicate with them constantly because I'm so heads down all the time. But I also have a YouTube channel, which is kind of how this whole thing started for me. I did digital music production ever since I was like a teenager. Discovered creepypastas, if you're familiar with those, that, basically amateur horror narrations on YouTube. I didn't even realize it was a thing until I stumbled across it. And I thought, oh, heck, I could do that. But then I thought, well, I don't want to do just that. I want to do that plus sound effects and music and, give it a full immersive experience. And so that's kind of what my channel, I call it Oral Stimulation. That's where kind of my skill set for what I'm doing now kind of got its start. I'm also a web developer, graphic designer, video editor. So I try to, all things digital media, I'm really into and I really enjoy. And I do that. My day job is as a web developer. So I've got roughly, 6+ years audio production experience doing this particular kind of work, and then roughly 15 in the digital media space in general. I thought I'd get into some of the misconceptions and problems that producers and post-producers face. And with misconceptions, I'm just trying to keep it really brief. So we've only got about 4 points per theme here we're talking about. So we're talking about how the term audio producer is often misunderstood, and also that it can have different definitions depending on what kind of show you're making. All audio is the same, so what's the big deal? It's got to be a pretty simple job. You're just mixing stuff together and publishing it, right? And you have to have a degree in order to be an audio producer because it has a high barrier of entry. So I'm going to try to dispel some of this stuff if I can. As a podcast producer, you might be a producer in the sense that you organize things and then you hand it off to other teams. Or you might be like me, where you're all of these things: sound designer, editor, music supervisor, audio engineer, re-recording mixer, mastering engineer, director for your actors, and also project manager. And basically that's what myself and Phil and Jesse are entrusted with every single episode for the No Sleep podcast. We have a showrunner, David Cummings. We call him the Podfather. And he basically gives us carte blanche to go ahead and, he has an editor team who basically handpicks the stories that we're going to produce. They hand it off to us. And from there, we're basically the showrunners of our own mini production. And so once I get my cast handed to me in the script, it's basically up to me until the completion of the project to make sure that it all runs okay and that it doesn't fall apart, which can be a bit stressful. But luckily, we've also been able to harness some technology to assist us with that. And I'll get to that a little bit later. All audio is the same. Well, audio sometimes can vary wildly between contributors. Now, in the case of a production like Jared's, where you're doing it all in-house and you've got full control over your recording environment, that's fantastic. That's the best possible scenario you could ask for. I would say that's better than studio time because you can call the hours, you can call the shots, you can tweak the mics to your happiness level, and you don't have to worry about burning studio time and dollars to make it all sound the way you want it to sound. In our situation with No Sleep, all of our contributors are remote, every single one of them. Nobody records in a studio, nobody records on site anywhere. So we have to basically take what can be one single actor for a story up to 12 or 16 actors for a story maybe, and make sure everybody's audio comes in, and then we have to go through it and basically clean it up and make it presentable so that it's ready for mixing. and the quality can go any which way. Some people have amazing, beautiful Sennheiser microphones that are all in a beautifully deadened space. Other people have Blue Yetis that they've had for 20 years or whatever, and they haven't done any dampening in their studio apartment bedroom or whatever. So you have to figure out how are we going to try to normalize the discrepancy basically between all the audio. Like I said, it's our job to make it sound the same, and that can be a huge challenge. And it can sometimes be such a huge challenge that you actually have to change out who you're using. When you have really tight deadlines, sometimes you have to make the hard decisions and cut people from your cast just because they cannot maintain a level that you need to output on a very fast, consistent basis. That could be upsetting, or annoying. I would say always kind of leave yourself open to having people come back and saying, okay, well, I treated my space, I've done this, that, and this, and how's it sound now, and evaluate, because ultimately everybody, in this space really enjoys contributing and they like to contribute. And as long as you've got a nice professional attitude with everybody, there are polite ways to basically, suggest, okay, well, you might want to improve on this and that, and, come back to us when you feel like you can. So another misconception is that it's a simple job because you're just mixing audio sounds together, right? And then it's just a simple little MP3 at the end of it. I wish that were true, but the ratio is that the time in is vastly larger than the final finished minutes. And in the case of an actor versus a producer, actors get lauded pretty high up, especially when you've got multiple narrators or main characters who appear in an episode and stuff like that, and everybody's got their favorite actor, and especially when it's a regular series like ours. What never gets talked about is how little they do versus how much we do, which is not to discredit or, to say anything about the talent of the actors and how much effort they put in, because they're amazing. But they might be done in an hour. You might work 30 times that. And that's important to remember. And also that comes into how you plan and organize how you're going to do your role, and it's production is a slog. And the thing that I like to do as a producer is to make sure that I basically cut all the corners I possibly can to make my job as quick and repeatable as possible. And you have to have a passion for it. And if you feel it's not for you, that's totally okay, because sometimes it feels like the job asks more of you than you can give. So the important thing is to kind of define your own boundaries and make it work for you instead. You need a degree in audio production. I was really scared about this. When I graduated from college, I was really into this stuff. I really enjoyed it. And I was considering doing like a postgraduate diploma in audio production, where you basically go learn how to do studio engineering and all this stuff, which was prohibitively expensive and really competitive. And I thought, well, even if I did get my degree, am I ever going to be able to work in this field when I have to basically be a tiny little amateur going up against big guys who are established in the industry? And how much industry is there even here? I live in Ontario, Canada, and aside from Toronto, there might not be a ton of opportunities around. And I was really worried about that. So I actually decided to not even pursue it, until I realized that I actually did have all the skills that I needed. I just didn't have them presented to me in such a way that I understood I had them. I had an epiphany basically by experimenting. And that's one of the things I enjoy so much about this job, is the experimenting. You can learn by doing it. And that's the key. Anytime you invest in doing this, in watching YouTube videos on how to do it, playing around with the software, seeing what works, what fails, what your strengths are, and what your weaknesses are, it's all experience, and it counts towards getting better at doing what you do. And you shouldn't ever look at it as anything but positive gain over time. And I would say that experience counts more than anything. We've had professionals who we've brought in to trial them out, who their resume is fantastic. They worked on X number of studios and done these different productions, but they did not suit our sound at all. They hadn't worked in podcasting. They hadn't worked with audio drama maybe before. Maybe they've worked in professional studios and they knew how to do music production, but they couldn't kind of grasp how we were doing what we were doing. And I'd say that that is a huge factor. So sometimes the little guys who've been doing little things on YouTube and stuff might fit what you're looking for a little bit better than the pros. They also cost a lot less. And really never stop learning and challenging your comfort zone. If there's a thing you don't know how to do, get out there and figure out how to do it. That's a key thing, is you can never, ever rest on your laurels if you want to be doing this constantly. And every project is a learning opportunity. And I'd say after 6+ years of doing this, I don't look at any project as, oh, well, I'll just do what I did on this last project. It's like, okay, well, I figured out how to do X, Y, and Z on that last project. For this project, let's figure out a new opportunity to do something different or better, or something that's a little bit scary that I haven't tried before. We'll get into some problems with production. And again, this is post-production more than anything else, but that's okay. Production is problem solving. I've been saying this for years, and that's exactly what it is. And I think that's why I personally love it so much, because my day job is nothing but problem solving. I'm a web developer. I do JavaScript coding and things like that. So it's all about squashing bugs and figuring out the better and more optimized way of doing things. And when it comes to production, whether you're setting up mics for everybody to record with, figuring out how to improve the space you're recording, or figuring out how to use the software you're doing to do your mixing better and faster, it's problem solving. And if you love doing that kind of thing, that's what's so addictive about this job, about audio drama in general. Basically, the problem of an audio drama is, I want to tell a story. How do I do it? As a producer, you have to figure out the minutia of exactly how you're going to do that. And, if that's how your brain is wired, you're going to have a great time doing it. Problems. So loosely defined project outline and deadlines. That's a pretty big problem right there. Waiting on contributors, scheduling woes, poor planning and organization, both from you and from the people you work with, and the email labyrinth, as I call it. So we'll go for loosely defined project outlines. Without any boundaries, your projects will go on forever if you let them. It can take you months to do one production, especially if you're like me. When it comes to like music production, I tinker for like a year until I'm happy with the track. And even then, when it's done, I'm not sure if I'm happy with it. It's a conundrum that music people fall into all the time, and it can easily extend to podcasts. You have to set limitations and expectations. Set a deadline for your pre-production, for your post-production, for when you're going to release. And like Jared was saying, do you go whole hog and make it the full cinematic experience that you can do with the experience that you've got? Or do you scale it right back and say, look, this is like my first or second thing. I'm going to limit it down to 4 characters, and we're only going to do a few different settings, and we're just going to start slow so I can kind of get a feel for how we're doing this. And, whether that's from a writing perspective or from a sound design perspective, you might decide that doing sound effects in your show at all is just too much, and that maybe just some simple music in the background underneath a narrator is all you really need. Planning your projects in phases, I think, is also really important as well. You want to basically figure out, and again, this speaks to Jared's kind of production process. You've got your writing phase, you've got your planning and pre-production phase, you've got your production phase, you've got your post-production phase, and things like that. Within production and post-production, you can also set phases of how you're working on that project. So today I'm working on dialogue, and we're getting the dialogue hammered out until it's perfect. And, we're going to wait on doing anything with any sound effects until 3 days from now or something like that. We're just going to focus on this chunk of thing is just to get the dialogue perfect. And this chunk, we're going to work on ambience and sound effects. And then maybe we'll, in the case of the show that I work on, we wait until music close to the end. And then I spend some time figuring out, what track goes where. Waiting on contributors and scheduling woes. Again, especially if you're working with people who are helping you out of the kindness of their own hearts, I should say, it's really hard to tap them on the shoulder and say, where's the stuff I asked you for a month ago? But at the same time, if you don't keep on top of them, you might never get what you're looking for. And I would say, don't be too precious with your contributors, even when they're contributing for free. Now, I would argue, if you can, show some kind of monetary contribution to them to show your thanks. But with that has to come with an understanding that, it's not just an acting gig for them. They have to be helping you too. You have to be on the same wavelength as far as wanting the production to be a success. If you tiptoe around contributors a bit too much, they will and can, walk all over you. And you might have somebody who you really wanted to be on your show because you liked their profile and you enjoyed hearing them in something else. But then when it comes to working with them, it might not jive really well with what you're trying to do. And, it's up to you to make that call, but ultimately one person can't dictate how successfully your production goes. Everybody has to be a team player. If scheduling becomes an issue, you have to consider recasting. It sucks. Recasting happens for a variety of reasons. You could have a person who's problematic. You could have a person who's just got a bad recording setup, and unfortunately it doesn't sound any better for when they record for you, or you just cannot get their time. And it sucks to do, but sometimes you just have to recast. And there's no room for managing everyone's ego. It's a very political thing when you're dealing with a large full cast production. It's imperative that everybody acts professional and that they get along. They don't have to all like each other, and that's fine. But what you can't be having is a lot of backstage jabbing at each other, or people coming to you and complaining about a person and things like that. It sounds silly to even think about that it might happen, but it does. They call it audio drama for a reason. And when you're dealing with actors and people who are learning this stuff, some people who consider themselves experts in this stuff, but may have a really cocky attitude about it, it can be a real problem sometimes dealing with people. And the one thing you want to kind of establish early on as God in the production is, look, guys, we all want to be on board and having a team attitude with all of this, and here's what we expect. And I think that also extends a little bit to what Jared was speaking about with having things like contracts in place. One of the things you might want to consider along with a contract is something like a non-disclosure agreement, because you don't necessarily want people blabbing about your project to everybody if it's not fully cooked, or if it's not ready, or if it's very nascent. Another thing is that, in the days when I worked on YouTube, because everything was so loosely organized, sometimes there's falling outs that people have, and then they slander, and you can open yourself up to legal issues, and you can also open yourself up to the community at large changing their opinion of you based on what somebody is making up. And it's weird to even have to talk about that as a possibility, but I've seen it happen, and it can get pretty ugly. So I think, having those agreements in place even before you start is a really good thing to do. Poor planning and project organization. So this can extend whether you're fully experienced and been doing this for years, or if you're just starting out as a producer. It's important to avoid feeling overwhelmed by the scope of your project. You could have a project that is, by my standards, pretty simple, but because you're very new at it, or you're trying something that you've never done before, it can feel really daunting. If you look at productions like Jared's or The White Vault, for example, that's about as complicated as it gets as far as the fidelity of sound that you're going for. It's basically like watching a movie without any video, which is amazing, but really hard to pull off. And if you look at it from a 30,000-foot view, it can feel terrifying. So it's important to focus in really narrow on what you've got to do today. Don't take a scattershot approach of, okay, well, I've got some dialogue here and I'm going to stick this sound effect in, or else I'm going to forget about it here. We're going to do a little bit of ambience here because I recorded this yesterday and I just don't want it to leave my head. Stop don't ever do that kind of approach to things. Break it all down systematically and think about, how you want to itemize how you do what you do. And that includes organizing inside your project as well. How are you going to break down your mixing, projects so that things are organized there as well? You don't want to be necessarily mixing your vocals in with your sound effects, one track underneath each other. If it's a multi-track production with, 4 or 5 different sound elements, dialogue, sound effects, ambience, musics, etc. You want to have a nice clear delineation right inside your project. And having disaster recover strategies when you do production on a weekly basis, like I do, having backups that go to a local drive, having backups that go to the cloud can be a lifesaver. There's a really great product called Crash Plan, which will allow you to do local backups onto hard drives that you might have right on your desktop or whatever. And it will also upload to the cloud unlimited, which is great. So I back up my projects as I work on them. So if I ever have a problem where everything on my hard drive dies and I have to get a whole new hard drive or whatever, yes, I'll lose what was locally on the drive, but because I've been backing it up onto other hard drives or onto the cloud, I'm not starting from scratch all over again. The email labyrinth. So I experienced this early on. So there was another organization I was affiliated with before No Sleep. So after I started my YouTube channel, I worked with another horror organization called Chilling Tales for Dark Nights. They found me and I found them organically. And it turns out that the sound that they were looking for was exactly what I was already doing with my channel. And we ended up kind of combining our powers together. And I worked as an executive producer with them for quite a while. We did everything through email. And we had a staff that rivals the No Sleep staff now. It got to about 40 people. In various different locations and stuff all over the world. And getting anybody organized and getting people to hand things in on time and things like that was a nightmare, because we really had no real project management happening. So it was a lot of chasing everybody's tails and replying in these massive stacked replies and everything like that, and which is really a nightmare. Luckily, there are modern solutions to this. Slack, Discord, Asana, things like that exist now, which are basically, project management light collaboration environments. On the No Sleep podcast, we work with Teamwork, which is it's not free, it's a subscription, but basically allows you to integrate with Dropbox and also has its own local file storage as well. So it allows you to set tasks, it allows you to set deadlines and dates, assign roles. Basically everybody finds out through email notifications if they've been cast on to a story, and we're able to send messages to each other through it, and upload. When our contributors upload their audio, it goes to our Dropbox. We get notifications as producers. We can pull it down and start working. So it's really key if you're working on a schedule, especially. Like I said, cloud-based file transfer is how we handle our files. So Dropbox or Box.com or Google Drive. Avoid emailing things back and forth, because that just gets lost. And you want a central location where you can access this stuff as the producer, especially when you need people to do retakes or add more audio. You don't want to be waiting on an email that might not come. Hopefully I'm not taking up too much time here. Let's work smarter, faster, better. So one of the things I'm a total dork for is workflow optimization. So again, I'm a post-production guy. I've got deadlines every single week. I need to be able to work as fast as I possibly can with as little effort as I possibly can. So for me, that begins with choosing the right digital audio workspace. In the audio drama world, especially, it being a low barrier to entry, people often consider low barrier meaning I have to do everything free or as cheap as possible. And that's true, if you're starting out. And I know that one of the go-to pieces of software that everybody likes to use in podcasting is Audacity. I don't have a lot of nice things to say about Audacity, but I certainly can appreciate it's a free, powerful piece of software for people who are just starting out. And the typical response for why do you use it is because it's easy. And it is, but when it comes to doing production of a show, of a multicast audio drama, ultimately you're going to shoot yourself in the foot with a product like that because of its inflexibility. And I would recommend that to investigate other equally or more powerful pieces of software that allow you to do your editing in a non-destructive way, that let you take advantage of things that will optimize your workflow. Done my fair share of Audacity work, and I will say that it's a fine piece of open source software, and kudos to the team who builds it, and kudos to anybody who uses it for their show. Don't knock that in any way. But when it comes to doing things, repeatable tasks that you need to be able to do fast on a tight schedule and things like that, I find that it falls right down. So my personal preference is Kakos Reaper. Now, I'm not going to advocate any one particular piece of software, but I am going to say that this is the software that I use. Other people use Pro Tools or Cakewalk or GarageBand or Logic Pro or any of those pieces of software, and they're all great. This is what I personally use. I will say, if you're worried about cost, that you certainly can use Reaper on a trial basis for free, even though it says it's for 60 days or something like that. You can actually use it free indefinitely until you decide to purchase a license. I wasn't sure about it. You can basically keep evaluating, and it won't lock you out. It won't strip away any features. And I wasn't sure about it. I was experimenting with a bunch of other pieces of software and stuff, because it can feel a little bit daunting when you first start out. It's a little bit more complicated than Audacity or Acid or something like that. But, finally I said, okay, well, this is the one for me. And I purchased a license. The good news with something like Reaper, it's $60. So you're not blowing the bank on thousands and thousands of dollars for one piece of software for your production workflow. The way I like to think about it is, you've invested in your computer, you've invested in your audio interface, you've invested in a microphone, you might have invested in something to make some music if that's what you do. To invest $60 on one piece of software that's going to be your Bible for all your audio production needs it's not a big expense. And I would say, if you're looking to do audio production for audio dramas long term, or for big projects, that you should consider a fully featured DAW, unlike the stripped down versions that you'd get with Garage or with Audacity. So this is just a simple screenshot of the current project that I'm working on right now. So we've got 3 actors. I've just basically divvied tracks up into who's speaking where, and I've put in some markers to say where the dialogue happens and where the sound effects and ambience happens. So, and it's very easy to extend and customize the software. And I'm sure you can do the same thing with other pieces of software like Pro Tools. But this is an example of what, the process that I like to take in order to make sure that I stay nicely organized inside my project. And this is just an example of one of the templates that I use. Where my main mixing template is massive. It's like 90 tracks or something like that. And they all start kind of completely blank, and I put stuff in as I go. But the main thing here is, okay, well, we've got things broken down, color-coded basically by the character, and it allows you to narrow in and get in there. I won't spend much time on the Reaper side of things, but I am going to see there. Can you see that now? Okay. So I was just showing you the live view of that screenshot. But basically what this allows me to do is, if I wanted to dump in my narrator here. So here's an example of how I work. So in this case, I've got a narrator file here. The narrator is basically the main character. And one thing I've done as part of my pre-planning thing is I've communicated clearly to my actor, and I said, look, when you're going to have when there's a spot where there's going to be dialogue that another actor needs to be saying something, I want you to take a 2 to 3 second pause of complete silence and leave that in the file. But what the pause does is it allows me to run some automation tools, which basically allows me to very quickly stick in the markers for where I need to go with that other audio. So if I was to just run this, I'm translating from a Mac keyboard to a PC, so this is going to be a fun challenge. But if I do, yeah, so I'm just going to set this to repeat 100 times. Don't worry too much about the minutia of what's actually happening here, but I'm just saying any silence that's, say, 2,500 milliseconds, it's going to go through that, and we're going to ignore anything shorter than that, and we're going to cut up. It's going to run through basically a custom macro that I built, and it's going to cut up any silences and leave spaces and markers. And I hit this button, and it runs through, and I'm going to say reposition all of my audio items so that they line up nicely on the grid. And I'm going to do it for 1.5 seconds, which basically translates to 3 grid lines. Boom, 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 boom. Now I've got all the markers for my character dialogue. And I can go from marker to marker and say, okay, well, this one is, character 2, and they're saying, hello world. And because I called it Vox 2, it automatically turns yellow. So that allows me to very quickly go to the next one, to the next one, to the next one. And I've laid out my entire, dialogue marker scenario for the entire project in one fell swoop. And then all I need to worry about at that point is basically slicing up the rest of the audio from the rest of the contributors and sliding them back onto the markers and just pushing everything across. And I can make that happen in, an hour. I can have my vocal mix ready for a 15-minute long production, for the week. And, it took me a long time to figure out how to do any of this. And what I'm trying to do is save this stuff and make it into templates and into stuff I can export. Because one of the things that's really great about a piece of software like Reaper is you can take your entire configuration, including all your shortcuts and everything, and export it into one file that you can import into another implementation, and everybody can be running kind of on the same platform. Basically, that's how I specifically work. Everything's done with hotkeys, with mouse actions and everything like that, so that I'm not spending time going up into my menus or navigating 5 different things in a row, which is one of the things that drove me crazy with other pieces of software. It's like, okay, well, I did this, but now I have to go over here and process that. Now I have to go over here. Oh, I screwed up. Okay, undo. None of that has to happen if you're trying to make this stuff happen quickly. It's just a question of figuring out how to do it quickly and then using that as kind of your muscle memory. So let me jump back out of this. So that's just an example. Like, I didn't want to get too deep into the technicality of what the software is like and everything like that. But I do want to impress that having a process of how you do things and making it repeatable, and if you can, automated, can significantly reduce the amount of sweat and tears that you're putting into this work, to the point that you can really focus on the stuff you want to focus on, which is being creative and expressive with your production and not getting buried in the minutia of how do I get my actors to not sound like they're talking over each other, or that kind of thing. So when we get into working in an optimized fashion, time management, like it all ties together, certainly with how you're managing your actors and how you're managing your project and how you're managing your software. They all interlock. So what I like to do when I'm in a production session is make goals and stretch goals. So certainly today's the day I'm going to get my narrator, bit snipped up and all the markers laid out for where all the other dialogue is going to go. And then I'm going to go to bed, and then I'm going to work, and then I'm going to come home. The next day, my goal is to get all those markers, lined up with other pieces of audio from other actors, and so forth. Stretch goal, it'd be really great if I could export the whole thing as a nice vocal mix that I could listen to while I'm at work and while I think about other things about what I want to do with the production. Keeping organized. From a post-production standpoint, I'd say taking notes right on the script itself is really, really helpful. Some people like to do time codes and things like that if they already have the recordings. Typically speaking, we receive our scripts a week in advance, maybe. So I like to read through and I like to think about, from a sound design perspective, what are the environments? What's the ambience? What am I going to be thinking about? Are there monster sounds? That means they're going to have to process somebody's audio and things like that. So taking those notes right on the script is really good. Maintaining a clean file system is also really good, and having good naming conventions, like Jared was saying. Dealing with varied audio, which is back to what I was talking about with when you've got multiple contributors and they're all remote. There's just various different techniques that you can use to kind of help normalize some of this stuff. And that includes things like removing hiss and de-reverbing if you have plugins for that. Noise gating, which means, cutting off anything that falls below a certain threshold so that it sounds nice and dry. Setting your EQ levels so you're rolling off booming lows and detenuating, hissing highs and things like that. Setting your leveling so that everybody's got roughly the same amount of loudness. And to not think of normalizing as peaks, but more about what's the overall loudness of the audio, and then following that up with some compression and limiting to help squish the audio, make it fatter, but transparent enough that it doesn't sound overdone. And that way, when you stick it into your final mix, you're not worrying at any point about processing that stuff or making it sound different. You're focused on getting the rest of the project done. And sometimes there's just no saving bad audio. Doesn't matter how expensive your plugins are. Sometimes there's just so much noise, or it's been done so poorly, or they recorded with too much gain or not enough, and you just got to get your actors to redo what they do. And it sucks, but it happens. Setting expectations for your actors from a technical standpoint. What's the file type that you're going to be using? What's the sample rate that you're going to be using? Directions on how to do a good recording setup, if they're going to make a pillow for it if they need to. Limiting takes, that's a big one. Sometimes you get overzealous actors who want to provide 16 takes of one thing, which is great. But boy, is it ever a slog to get through. So if you can limit that to say no more than 3, give me a range and we'll work from that. Direction, oftentimes you have to come back to the actor and say, okay, you misread a line, or you misinterpreted the motivation for this line, and being able to communicate that to them effectively and get them to redo it and come back to you is good. Ties into feedback and retakes. From a sample rate and file type and stuff like that, just set the baseline. We want it mono, we want it 24 kilohertz, we want it 48 kilohertz at a 24-bit sample rate, and then level it off at minus 3 dB or something like that. If you've got that all written down on a nice sheet that you can hand off to all your actors, they at least have some basis that they can try to match that to, and you can provide direction if they don't know how to do that stuff. Translating the script to the project. So we call them scripts for us. Technically, they're just, I don't have one here with me, unfortunately, but it's just the story written out. We basically do audio adaptations of short stories. So it's basically just got the chunk of the narration and then some highlighted lines of which character is which. So our editors highlight this character yellow and this one's purple and whatever. You might be working more with an audio drama script, which is has much more rigid structure to it, and it clearly defines what character's talking when and stuff like that. But don't get afraid to get in there and mark it up with a pen and highlighter. Think about the sounds that are happening at the same time. Audio cues that might not have been captured by the screenwriter or the author. What you want to do is basically scribble as much as you can and go through your script and turn those into markers in your project, so that you're not having to just listen to the audio to figure out what you're going to do next. Anytime you can eliminate listening until you're actually into the mixing bit is I personally prefer. I like to getting to the point where I'm not actually listening to anything until I'm mixing, because I have this repeatable process of getting the audio prepared and processed and laid out. And I'll do a first pass really quick. I'll set my play rate to like 2 times speed or something like that. Everybody sounds like a chipmunk, just so I know that where all the markers are going to go. And then I get that all that processed, and I'm into the mix. Now I'm going to worry about, where I'm going to go with my mixing, and things like prefixing your markers so that you're staying organized. What sound effects, what's vocals, what's ambience, and then Jared referred to it as, I can't remember what term you used, Jared, but we call it vocal foley, which is basically, the hisses and grunts and burps and whatever, where story breaks happen and things like that. So, where to kind of fade off and have a little transition and stuff like that. And with software like Reaper, you can actually color code all of that stuff. So there's a great extension for Reaper that allows, basically, as you saw in action there, I prefix something with Vox2 and that knew to turn it yellow. And that allows you to really quickly say, okay, well, character 2 is always yellow, character 3 is green, character 4 is teal, whatever. And here I need a bit of vocal foley, but they never recorded it, so I'm gonna know how to have to go back there. Maybe my narrator screwed something up. Everything else is pristine, but this one little chunk, you can snip it and actually color code just that chunk red, for example. So not to forget to revisit that and say, oh, okay, I need this bit redone. Reaper allows you to do notes right on the audio items themselves, which allows you to communicate that stuff easily. And another thing I really love about it when it comes to markers is it outlines your markers into a nice big list, which you can export to a spreadsheet, which can be really helpful when you want to share it with people or move it from project to project. I'll skip through this because I know I'm taking up a lot of time. Optimizing your software. How do we customize the job to make it run faster? Figuring out a hotkey for something that takes 5 different menu navigations to happen. Creating your own macros where I want to take this action and this action, I want to mash them together so that I push one button and it just does everything all at once. Creating your own shortcuts, speaks to that. Color coding, like I said. Templates is a huge one for us. I have 3 main templates that I use, and when it comes to the mixing template, every single time I load new template from here, and boom, I'm off to the races. When I started doing this, I didn't know anything about templating, so I just started every project from complete scratch. And the amount of time I wasted just spinning my wheels trying to get back to a spot where the last project was, or copying the last project as my starting point, sometimes that's problematic as well. So having a clearly defined template that's just ready for you to just start working in is really, really handy. And from a hardware perspective, if you're able to have multiple screens, have multiple screens. Because when you're doing things with plugins and things, being able to drag them off and not have them overtake your project while you're working on it are really good. So when I'm doing my mix, I've got 3 main templates that I use. So I've got my audio staging template. So this basically allows me to lay out all of the dialogue and mark up the project, basically from dialogue, ambience cues, sound effects cues. I don't worry about music, where breaks happen, and it's all laid out. I don't worry about how it sounds. All I care about is that I have vocal files from my actors and I've stuck them in. They might sound like utter garbage because I haven't processed them yet, but that doesn't matter. All that matters is that I get them placed perfectly. From that point, I can export the marker list into a spreadsheet, which I can then import into my final mix project. I've got an audio processing project. So a lot of people like to mix and match with their software. They've got one piece of software that they use for their mixing, but then they use something like SoundForge or something like that to do their processing, where they run a bunch of filters through and everything like that. Nothing wrong with that whatsoever, but I typically like to work all in one piece of software. So I do everything in Reaper. I don't worry about trying to carry things over into Audition to get my audio sounding this way in Audition and running it through a bunch of chains and stuff like that. So what I do is I take all the vocals and I just kind of like left align them right up against the beginning of the project. And I run them once through with a loudness plugin, which basically allows the plugin to basically figure out what the average loudness is for each track, and it automatically adjusts the gain with one button click. They all get grouped together relative to each other, and now they're all roughly around -16 LUFS, which is roughly what you want for streaming digital media. Anywhere between -23 to -16, but for podcasts we like to go a little bit loud. At that point, there's a folder or a bus that they sit inside of, which has EQ, a little bit of light compression and limiting, some noise removal and stuff like that. And I can apply that basically across all my tracks. And I basically set up a render queue, and I say, render this one as the narrator, this one's the character called Laura, this one's the character called Francisco, and I just let that run. Once that's done, I can go back to the audio items that I used in my audio staging and just wholesale replace them. So even if there's flubs and stuff like that, I don't cut any of that out. Like I cut it out as far as snipping it, but I don't remove it from the physical file. I just wholesale replace the whole thing with the new processed audio, and I don't have to worry about rearranging everything at that point. And that allows things to happen very, very quickly, as opposed to getting pristine audio that's all spaced out exactly what you want, but then you're kind of starting from scratch as far as slicing it all up. And then we have our master mix, which is sound effects and ambience and things like that. And I've built it basically so that everything happens in distinct layers, not just layers as far as like, here's my vocals and here's my sound effects and stuff, but also from an audio perspective, front, back, rear, surround. I mix as if it's kind of like a pseudo 5.1 surround sound environment, even though it all just gets translated to stereo. I like to have the whole thing modeled. I use the Facebook 360 audio workstation, which basically models everything as if it was happening around your head in a kind of pseudo binaural experience, but not binaural in the sense that everything sounds weirdly quiet if you listen to it on stereo. It down mixes to stereo, which just allows me to kind of set how present or how far back my audio is, and allows me to also move my characters through a 3D space if I want to, which is kind of fun. And then finally, we talked about a lot of this stuff, project elements inside your software, having your starter template that you're starting with. Basically what I like to do is, once I've got all my sound effects, markers and cues and stuff in my script all ready to go, I go and find them in my libraries. I don't have, unfortunately, the ability to go out and record a lot of this stuff, so I have to go find it. It's not cheap, but we have a subscription to a service called SoundSnap, which is high quality studio, Hollywood quality sound effects, which basically allows you to find them online and download them unlimited for a year, as opposed to paying per file. So in the end, it pays for itself, really, but it's an investment. Although there's all kinds of great free resources as well, and if you slowly build up your own library, then you've got a good pool of resources to start from. A key element with a piece of software like Reaper or Pro Tools is that if you're doing a lot of sound design work, it can get really confusing when you're worrying about all your vocals sitting here and you're worried about your ambience sitting here and your music sitting here, but you have to do a sound design moment like an alien jumping out of a ship while an explosion happens. That could be 30 tracks worth of audio. Do you really want to stick that in your main project and have to worry about negotiating how close and far away and cross-fading everything is? If you take advantage of something called a sub project, it allows you to basically define all of that stuff off in its own project. You get it sounding exactly perfect the way you want to, and you can take that entire project file, drop it into Reaper. It renders as one audio clip. And then if you double click on it, you go back into the project and you can make some tweaks. You hit save, it auto renders back to your other project. Saves tons and tons of time and effort, because now you've got just one little thing that you're dragging around, and that's it. FX chains, of course, if you're familiar with digital audio workstations in any capacity, it allows you to basically layer in all the different cool filters and effects that you might have on a given track. That's how I tend to work. I don't like stamping that stuff onto the audio in Audition or something like that, and then having to revisit it if I screwed it up. I tweak. I'm a tweaker. And I like to make real-time changes as fast and often as possible, because I got to work as fast as I possibly can. So if I can work without doing any kind of destructive or processing possible, I can, and I do. Track templates allows you to basically load in a template a track that already has a bunch of plugins on it and stuff like that, which can save time. Presets inside your plugins. And then lastly, sidechain compression, which one of the challenges is when you've got narration and lots of dialogue, but you've got these underlying sound effects and music, is you want to figure out a way to duck those other underlying elements down a little bit so that you don't lose your vocals. And one of the things you often hear if you listen to a lot of amateur productions is they don't do any of that. And either the background is way too quiet, you're kind of questioning why it's even there, or it's way too loud and they haven't done any ducking and you can't hear your narrator. So sidechain compression basically allows the signal from the people talking to basically tell all your other tracks to quiet down for a minute, until they stop talking. Thank you. I'm so sorry that took so long. I had no idea how long this presentation was, and I think I over-prepared for it.
Well, we can move on into the Q&A, but thank you so much. That was definitely, like you said, a lot of post-production, and it really helps get into the nitty-gritty. Yeah. So I'm happy that we have something that starts off with, here's how you do the overarching of everything for everyone coming in who's brand new, and then, hey guys, let's dive deep. Yeah. And figure this out. So again, that's what we're here for. We're here to create these great resources for the community. And if you would like to stop sharing your screen, then we can move on to doing some Q&A and trying to get through that before, I don't know what time it is for you guys, but I think for some of you it's pretty late. So let's try to get through all of this. Here we go to the chat. So I usually do this, everyone can read their own question, and we'll go in the order of when the questions were added into the chat. I put in the first question, so going back to Jared, was what differences do you see as most challenging in large versus small productions? And then Travis has to unmute you. Give him a second. There you go.
Good?
Yes.
All right. So great question. Jeff, great presentation, by the way.
You too.
So with large and small presentations, I assume you're talking about kind of like scope of the presentation.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, of the production. And, this whole roundtable is about logistics. And the larger your presentation, the larger your production is, the more balls you'll have in the air, the more logistics you'll have to worry about. So I would say one of the most challenging things as the scope of a project gets bigger and bigger is making sure that you don't get lost in those logistics and the smaller things don't start falling by the wayside. Because there might be something as simple as, did I send the actor their script with enough time to prepare? Well, if you're dealing with 2 or 3 actors, that might be, a step you're not going to forget. But if you're dealing with 40, it might be, oh, wait, did I do that? Oh, no, I didn't. Now you're kind of behind an 8 ball and you have to, pivot. So the larger things get, the more of those type of smaller things you have to be careful that you're not like letting slip.
Thank you very much. And we're going to have Brandon read his question.
Hey, I'm unmuted. So Jared, I think you mentioned that you found a lot of actors through Backstage.
Yeah.
So I was curious if you ended up working with any SAG actors, and if you did, how did you sort of navigate their financial sort of minimum requirements?
Great question. So yes, due to my kind of working in television, film, video over the years, I've had to deal with SAG and become familiar with them. So before we started producing The Phenomenon, I looked into kind of what the rules were with audio dramas and SAG. And it appeared, I knew that we were going to be a non-union project due to financial reasons. So the question, like you said, can we use SAG actors or can't we? And at the time, a few years ago, things may have shifted. But when I first looked into it a few years ago, audio dramas are kind of a gray area with SAG, because the big sticking point with SAG is there being a visual element to the work. So, if a voice actor is voicing something for an animation or for something like that, something that does have something that you look at on a screen, those rules are very clear. But with a project where there's no visual element and it's only audio, it was a little more vague. So keeping that in mind, when we went into casting, we didn't limit ourselves to non-union actors. We opened ourselves up to union, non-union. We were transparent that we were a non-union project, and we kind of let the actors decide for themselves whether they wanted to be a part of it or not. So if they belonged to a union, we talked about it, and they understood that this was kind of a new thing that didn't have like totally defined rules within the union, and some were comfortable moving forward and some weren't. And then that's okay. So we were transparent about where we were, and we just kind of let the actors make their own decisions about that.
Cool. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, next up we have Travis.
So this is kind of a hypothetical question. If you were given a large budget for not necessarily the phenomenon, because you already know what you're doing with that,
Mm-hmm.
but and you weren't going to pay you were paying your cast more, but what is the best use of money in the production of a podcast from your perspective that differentiates, the big Gimlet or the other guys from the things that we, the indie guys, are doing? What does money afford you outside of acting in your perspective, coming from that different world?
Well, a few things. So first off, touching on acting very quickly, aside from paying your actors more, having a larger budget opens a new world of acting talent towards you. The reason why Gimlet's audio drama productions get these name A-list stars are because they have, I'm not saying everyone's doing it just for the money, but when you have a budget, it can help bring in a different level of talent that you might not have available to you if you didn't have that. But aside from acting talent, I would say like audio production. Having more money is not an issue that most producers have to deal with. 99 times out of 100, you don't have enough money and you have to find creative solutions. But I would say if a budget was a little bigger and you had a little more dollars to spend, audio, your production budget would be where you would probably want to put that. You want to make sure that you're getting the best audio possible, that you're using the best facilities, best equipment possible. So a lot of the times in production, you have to look at things with, not necessarily what is absolutely the best thing to use, but what can we use that we can afford? What creative solutions can we use to get to the desired outcome? But if you had a little bit more money and you could look at approaching production in a different way, I would say that would be the best way to elevate things.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Next up, and the last one for Jared is from Raul.
Oh,
he's on the train.
Subway.
Okay. So if he's okay with it, if you can nod, I will read your question for you. Sure. Okay. I'm going to go with that being a positive response. He asks, how do you prep in case of a technical mishap? Mic's not working, cables being shoddy, computer errors. What if you're not technically savvy?
Great question. Jeff touched on this a little bit, but yes, first of all, when it comes to your actual files, backing things up religiously, we always have multiple local backups and a cloud backup. As soon as we're done recording things, the nightmare scenario is you record this beautiful audio with your actors and then you lose it all, and you want to do everything possible to make sure that never ever happens. But aside from the actual files, from a hardware perspective, backup hardware. So we started doing, from season 1, we started with a 3-mic setup within our booth as an example of ways you can avoid this. So 2 main mics for, whatever 2 actors were in there at any given time, and a 3rd mic right in the middle that was expanding to a larger scope, filling the whole room. So if something happened to one of those mics, we had a backup there that maybe wasn't the most ideal sound quality because it wasn't right there on the actor, but it was something that we could use in a catastrophic scenario. So even during production, thinking about what if this mic fails? What if it doesn't pick this up? Knowing there's always different things that you can go to, as backups.
Yeah, and as soon as you introduce another physical body, hardware just likes to just die.
Oh yeah.
I don't know why. It's just like the aura of someone can just throw off everything.
Totally.
So we can go into the questions for presentation number 2. And thank you guys for going through these pretty quickly because we are drawing out time a little bit further. This one comes actually from me. Similarly to casting, how do you find quality sound designers or mix master people? Is there a resource for finding these people in the same way that there's resource for maybe finding actors?
That's a good question. It's not one I'm going to be able to answer terribly well. I will say that I am part of a online social media group called Stage 42, which is a pretty decent resource for locating actors and producers and things like that. As far as finding fellow amateurs who you can connect with and save money on, I don't exactly know. Twitter's always good. It's a good way to network with other people, and I'd say YouTube is a pretty decent resource as well. My experience with YouTubers is that you can usually get in touch with them fairly easily, and if you hear some of their work that you like, they're usually pretty excited to get out of the YouTube bubble and do something new. So I would look in those spaces for them as opposed to trying some of the more common spots that you might look, because you might get someone who's a bit of a outside the box thinker or has kind of a different experience base that might really work really well with your production.
Okay. I think our next question comes from Travis.
Actually, I need to ask that question. It was right in the beginning. I have some really cool time savers.
Okay, so then I guess our next one actually comes from Colton.
Right.
Awesome. So as I understand, you said that you had, I think, 2 or 3 editors working on your show, editing sort of in parallel for separate segments. How do you ensure that all of them wind up producing a cohesive finished product and there aren't like fingerprints from specific editors that stand out as like particular quirks?
Yeah, that's, we don't. There are fingerprints. But I think that in a way that's kind of what endears people to our show. A Phil production versus a Jesse production versus a Jeff production. Now, that being said, there are various standards we try to all follow as far as loudness levels goes. I think that's a big one right there. So we make sure that none of us are producing anything that's way too quiet or way overblown or overcompressed. Our showrunner has the final say on whether something's finished or not. And we've massaged our way into kind of ending up with finished products that sound, from an audio quality perspective, very, very similar. Phil's got all the toys, so he's got the greatest plugins that do all the best, denoising and declicking and everything like that. And I'm maybe the next step down, and then Jesse's the next step down. But generally speaking, we do try to kind of hit at least that standard. Now, that being said, stylistically, there's very different approaches. Phil is very much he really likes doing the soundscapey sound design stuff. So he likes doing lots of stuff where he's mixing musical instruments all together and creating weird alien sounds. And he's a sound designer by trade amongst the many other things he does. So he likes to do a lot of stuff that's almost musical in its sound work. And then he likes to raise in the music and go really light on the incidental sound effects, and let the narration kind of take over. Jesse goes full bore Foley. I don't know where he finds the time to do it, but he records everything, clothes wrestling and stuff like that. We're all jump to a sound bank for that. He'll just stand in front of the mic, doing this for like an hour. and he does that per production,
Mm.
which I think is nuts, but God bless him for doing it, because it sounds great when you listen to the final product. In fact, it makes me insanely jealous sometimes, wishing I had the same amount of time to invest in this stuff that he did. My approach, I'm very much a realist. So I like really highly authentic sounding productions. So a narrator aside, I want to make sure my characters sound like they're in a real space. I like to think about what the sound of that space is like. So what ambience is happening in the background. I like to think about like Jared was talking about in his presentation, I like to visualize the scene. What does it actually look like in my brain? Because even though the audience member might not fully grasp or appreciate what you're doing, what matters is that you know what you're doing. So if two characters are talking in a park, I want to know in my imagination, what does that park look like? Is there a road nearby? Are there trees? Is there a fountain? Is this person standing stage right? Is this person standing stage left? Are they moving across and talking back to each other? Things like that. Are they moving? Things like that. And I like the stuff to sound as realistic as I possibly can manage, because I'm just a dork for that kind of sound design. I like the cinematic stuff that has a very realistic, immersive sound to it. That's why I really enjoy your show, and it's why I really enjoy the White Vault, because you guys go right in for, you're right there with the characters, and that's very much my flavor too. So so we definitely leave our own fingerprints. It's funny because it's a fun opportunity each episode to kind of sit back and listen to what the other guys did, because it's like, I'm happy with what I did, but I wonder what Phil did today. It's like, holy crap, he did this amazing reverse boom cymbal thing, and it made my eardrums explode. And it's like, I don't even know how he did that. So you get to appreciate the cool skill that they bring to it. That is something maybe completely different than you would have even thought to try, which is really cool. So yeah, it's one of the things that makes our show, and because it's an anthology show, that works out really well. If it was a serialized show, it would be more of a challenge, but I think you could probably get around it by saying this person's directing this episode and this person's, so more like a TV show, or how they do with the Game of Thrones or something like that. They'll bring in a different director per episode, and they give their own little flair to an overall formula. So yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Next up, we have Brandon.
All right.
Who will have to unmute himself.
Oh.
Oh.
Too quick on the draw. I'm realizing that I plagiarized Colton's question, but for actors. So the way we did the Ordinary Epics, we had all the actors in the same room, which we enjoyed. For the performances you got out of that, sort of the spontaneity and the energy matching, and just sort of like the unplanned things that can come out of that. What was not great was all the bleed, and it made my sound designer's life difficult for a long time. So for logistical reasons, probably for season 2, we'd be recording them separately, similar to how you do, Jeff. So I was curious, how do you get the actors to match energy? How do you get that sort of spontaneous feeling when they're recording separately and they don't have that sort of face-to-face thing?
Yeah, well, can I answer with magic? Because honestly, that's what it feels like. I think a lot of it has to do with having a cast that you trust, and having a cast where you intrinsically know that they bring a level of caliber of talent to what they do, that they intuitively know how to deliver a particular line or whatever. Sometimes it flubs and you got to get them to redo it, which sucks, but sometimes it happens. But the amount of times where just pure amazing magic happens, where it's like, Jessica recorded this last week Thursday, and Kyle did this yesterday. She lives in Arizona. Kyle's off in Michigan or wherever. different recording setups, but they do have the same script. So presumably they've both read through the script. But just like you get one, especially when you have those moments where one person's talking and it's immediately followed by more dialogue, it doesn't have the narrator in the middle, and you hear them line up, and it's just like in one take. Because a lot of these guys, they do it all, they give me everything with one take. I don't have like multiple takes to choose from often. Sometimes I do. It depends on how challenging the role is or what they're trying to do with it. But if it's kind of a straightforward thing, it's typically one. And even just in that one take, it's like, how, it sounds like you're standing right beside each other. How the hell did you do that? And it's just the talent of the crew, and just having that, the way they kind of, you can just kind of trust that they're gonna provide. And so much of production is just happy accidents. I mean, even just when it comes to our music, we're very, very blessed and to have a skilled, talented composer who does custom music per episode for us with Brandon Boone. He has a general feeling for what tone he wants to give to a particular story. And as when I spoke earlier to what it's like being kind of like a music supervisor for the show, I give him my notes as to what I want to hear or what I think would be really cool for this scene and stuff like that. But really he just goes and does his thing. And if you want to talk about optimized time, he's got to produce 10 to 15 pieces of music per story, per episode. And he just pounds those things out each night. It's insane the amount of productivity he does. And he'll do it in one go without thinking too hard about how it's all mixed together. And somehow it all sounds amazing. And what is a really magical moment is when you drop in a piece of music and he's got this one awesome dramatic hit, and it hits right after your narrator says something really impactful. And like you just dropped it in, and you've got an hour before you got to get to bed and get this thing rendered and sent off and everything. And you listen to it and it's like, oh my God, how did that happen? It sounded like he made that cue directly for that moment with the narration, and it all happened light years away from each other. And just this amazing magic happens, and it happens every single week, whether it's the actors or the directors. Even sometimes a simple piece of ambient sound in the background, and there's somebody's cell phone rings as they're walking by in the background sound, but it just happens in that perfect little gap in between when the characters are speaking. And it's like, and it just happened because you happen to drag that clip right there and no other reason. And I love that about that. And that spontaneity that can happen is one of the fun, creative things that you can enjoy when you're locked in post-prod world like I am.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
Always love when the answer is magic.
Yeah.
Our last questions come from Travis.
Right.
So you mentioned a color changing macro.
Yes.
I wasn't sure if it was a macro or a program, but what is?
Well, it's actually an extension. So
yeah.
There's a main extension for Reaper called the SWS extension. And basically it's like a must-have extender for Reaper, which adds all sorts of really great things, including color coding, automatic color coding, which is really great, but all sorts of really cool macros and shortcuts that kind of just make things a lot nicer. If you go through the Reaper action list when you're creating your own custom macros, it adds in lots of stuff that the default out of the box doesn't do. So it's like, there might be an action for bring cursor to left edge of media item and quantize or something like that. And like, which it didn't do out of the box, but it's like, oh, well, that's vital for me producing this, creating this macro that's going to do this, 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 and this. That thing where it auto inserted all of those markers for me, that was SWS was the thing where basically it did that thing where it's like, how much space do you want between your media items? And I said 1.5 seconds or whatever. SWS was what handled that. And then it just stuck in all the markers as well. So it's a mishmash of those things. Loudness program I use is a plugin called the Lufs meter, LUFS, by Klangfreund. It's great. So what it does is it basically will, like any loudness meter, it kind of shows you an average of loudness over time, and it shows you peak loudness in an instant and stuff like that. And what it allows you to do is say, For this audio, basically you can bounce it or render it really quickly, and it will quickly go through and figure out what the average loudness is. And you can set up basically a goal loudness that you want. Say I want -16, and it comes in at -30. If you click this thing that just says adjust, it basically blows up the gain for you intelligently, so that it brings the average loudness up to -16. And one of the things I love the very best about it is you can drag multiple instances across multiple tracks and then give them groups. So everything in group 1 is all going to be relative to each other. And I hit the one button and the whole group gets set. So that's when we're talking about time savers. I'm not stressing about each individual track, how it's sounding, how much loudness it is, and carefully measuring it and stuff. You can certainly do that if you want. I don't have time for that. So I let it pass through, and with one full render, it shows me, you know, where everything needs to be adjusted. I hit one button, it automatically, it's called, they call it gain leveling or something like that.
Is it normalization?
It's like normalization, but they call it levels up mixing, which means all of your faders stay at 0, but the plugin itself, it does the audio adjusting. And then when you render it through, as long as you keep that plugin running, the gain's basically where you want it to be, and everything's roughly relatively loud as you want. Things get thrown off when you've got like a really loud screen. Your average gets skewed, you know, and then so you have to bring up the volume for the rest of the audio and stuff like that. But generally speaking, when everyone's speaking at a normal speaking tone and stuff like that, it's highly accurate, and it really saves a lot of time and consternation, because loudness levels it can get really confusing, it can get stressful, it can get annoying, and to be able to just like let the software figure it out, and then you can make the smaller tweaks in your mix at that point and use EQ to roll things off and quiet things down. So, and when I do EQ, when I was learning EQ just by watching music production and stuff, the key thing is subtract your EQ, don't add. People tend to do the opposite. It's like, oh, I really want, it's not boomy enough and it's not tinny enough, and so we're just going to go, you know, and make this massive slope that's all blown out and everything. But if you actually cut away everything and then gradually bring your overall gain up, you end up with a much more refined sounding EQ, and that benefits too. So that's definitely some time savers right there.
I think it's a good way to end on the questions and the Q&As. And I just wanted to say that when you were giving your presentation and you cut that one track into all the multiple pieces, you should have seen how wide Travis's eyes got. He was like, what just happened? How do I do that?
Yeah.
So
yeah, I saw that. But I mean, that was my reaction the first time I did it, because I kept thinking, like, you know, because I'm a programmer, and it wasn't a lot of programming. It was just basically this action comes, then this one, and you're just basically layering them on top of each other and then hit go and try it out. And I've spent entire weekends where I did nothing but fart around with macros to see if they would work. And sometimes it was a total wash and I'm nothing gained from it. And then now I'm behind on my project, you know, but the net gain is over time, I figured out, oh, okay, well, if I do this, this, and this, and they run in just such a way, holy crap, now I've saved myself 3 hours of work with one key press. That's where having software that can handle that benefits you greatly. You know, and if you're just starting out and you're using something like Audacity, you're just understanding how audio works together. But when you're doing things with deadlines and you're worrying about all the big pieces that have to mash together, yeah, being able to do things with a couple of mouse clicks is such a godsend.
But now we open up everything to some discussion. And if people have something that they didn't think of until during the Q&A, or something that didn't really fit in with any of the parts of the presentations, but they still think they need to have a little bit of a back and forth on, you can just go ahead. If you kind of just like make some type of motion, Travis can try to unmute you so we can still kind of keep the background levels to the minimum. You know?
I have a question.
Yes, Rochelle.
Great. So thank you for both of those great presentations. You both talked about visualization, even though the end product, right, is supposed to just be oral. So you're not going to have the visual element, but you'll have some sound. Has that ever gotten you into trouble and made more work for you, right? Because there's not going to be a visual element. And if so, kind of how do you balance that?
It definitely makes the world that you're working inside of bigger. You know, makes sound design bigger than you may have anticipated because there's different elements that, you know, maybe you didn't plan for. But those are also the things that can really take it to the next level. If you're going for realism, if you're trying to really put the listener inside of a certain situation, it's those invisible sounds that you might not think of right off the bat when you're writing your script or when you're designing a scene, but that exist in our everyday life. It's those kind of invisible sounds that when you put those in, that's what really adds realism to a certain scene. Something else that I thought of while Jeff was talking too was what we try to visualize also isn't just the setting that a scene takes place in. I also like to think about where, how I describe it is like where the mic is or where you are supposed to be, similar to how a cinematographer might think, you know, where the camera is. Thinking where you have to think where the characters are, but also where you are, where you want the audience to be experiencing something from. So you're picturing this entire scene and thinking of like where you want it to be, you know. So if you're next to character A and character B is further away, it's going to sound a lot different than if you're right in the middle of those two. It's about those invisible sounds and also about just thinking about how you want your audience to experience that setting.
Perfect illustration of that. I was listening to the first episode of The Phenomenon, and there's this great moment where everything has kind of gone to hell, and the main government guy, I'm not quite sure his name, but he realizes he has to get everybody to safety, and he's talking with somebody, and so you're kind of like standing in between the characters, but suddenly you're following him as he runs outside to another building to get some people and then runs back. So it's like you can visualize you're running behind with the camera following him, and then they get back to the kitchen and suddenly you're on a tripod again, and he's over here and they're over there, and it's amazing how intuitive that is in your ears, because it doesn't sound on paper like that would work. Mm-hmm. But we've all seen enough movies, and it's so cinematic in its presentation that ultimately it's pretty simple to follow it. And I love that creativity. The camera as it was is one of my favorite things to play with, because you can go from locked on the main character for the entire thing, and then suddenly it'll stop and the main character goes over here, and that can have an effect on you, on how you feel. It's like, oh my God, where are you going? Suddenly I don't feel safe anymore, and which is great in like a horror setting, for example. Someone gets attacked by an evil creature or something, and they go off onto your right ear, and you're like, but I was following this person the whole time, So.
Yeah, we often kind of will ask ourselves when we're in post, okay, like where are we right now? And is that the best place for us to be? Or if we put the camera or the mic in a different position in this setting, is the audience going to have a different experience? Are they going to have a better experience? Is the mic are they experiencing this from like the most ideal vantage point? Yeah, and it's fun to see how that vantage point, as that changes, how you experience the scene changes. So
yeah, definitely. And one of the things I really enjoy, because it's a very repeatable job that I do every single week, I like to find ways to kind of make it fresh and creatively, fun and fulfilling. I try to do one holy crap sound design moment per story, and just one thing that's just for me. That I can feel when I listen to it, it's like, oh yeah, that's what I wanted to hear in this one story, because most of it's narration or whatever. And that's the thing where you're talking about sinking a bunch of time that you didn't necessarily need to spend, but the payoff can sometimes just feel so sweet. And then you hear it again 2 years later or whatever. It's like, yeah, I'm so glad I put that effort into that, because, you know, one of my proudest moments of last season of No Sleep Podcast, I got saddled with this production called by a writer friend of mine named Henry Galley. He writes these crazy stories, and this one story basically turned out to be Army of Darkness, Evil Dead, and meets Helm's Deep. And so this army of the dead comes marching up to this house full of people with a bunch of guns, and they have this massive battle. And I had to like make the crowd and make all the gun sounds and everything like that. But there's this one moment where they kick open the front doors and they've got a Browning machine gun and they just go to town on them. And I spent a whole day just on that piece. And it's still to this day the most satisfying thing I think I've ever made, because I boosted up the bass and I got a really great realistic sound of it. And it feels like a movie when you listen to it. And it's just like, you know, I sunk like 8 hours just into that one thing. And I didn't need to, but I'm glad that I did.
Just to piggyback one thing off of what Jeff said, you know, how he said having, you know, one great design piece per episode. And that's such a great way to think about it too. And we try to do a similar thing. And I kind of think about it as it's a little bit of like a reward for the audience in some ways too. Yeah. Because there's, in talking scenes, you can have amazing talking scenes that are so captivating, so amazing to listen to, have wonderful performances. But if you're going to maximize everything that audio drama can be, then sound design and those big moments are a part of that. So I always think like, okay, when I'm plotting out an episode, if I have like a bunch of like really like dialogue heavy scenes, one after another, I think, okay, this next scene needs to be an action scene. So it's thinking of it as kind of a reward for the audience. So they're not just dealing with people talking over and over and over again. Not that can't be amazing, but using it as a little break from that kind of pace can be really fun.
Yeah. And, you know, sometimes it's a little bit of an ego thing too. It's just like,
oh yeah,
I can do that. That thing I just did, yeah, I made that. It's like, it just feels really good. It's totally ego-driven, you know, wish fulfillment, but it's like, you know, this is what we're capable of, guys. Like, this is why you're listening, I hope.
I think we had a question down at Raul. Travis, if you want to unmute him.
We're battling. All right, sorry. I keep like shutting myself up. I'm stationary now, so there's no more distraction. No, I think this whole discussion has been like incredibly rewarding and exciting, and I'm just sitting here realizing I think for the better part, most of us probably see ourselves and understand ourselves as getting into this as another way of expressing something we've been a professional in for at least a couple of years, longer than that. So and it hit me. I was like, I understand everything you guys are talking about, but there may be several people who are watching that are like quickly trying to jot down exactly what's going on. So I guess I wanted to see if we're talking to people who are just kind of getting into it, and this, I guess, is more kind of a comment. I think what's really great about what you guys have been saying is you guys have formulated really clean ways of saying, this is what you can achieve. This is what we've learned in the time being. But I think it would be good, especially for people who may be intimidated by a lot of what we've been discussing, to understand that while these are like trajectories and these are great goals to get to, and I know you guys touched on this as well, I think what's really fun is learning from all these mistakes. I think the reason why all of us, I'm going to speak for everybody here, have found such a love for audio drama is because we're obsessed with learning, right? Mm-hmm. There's always something new to learn with every new piece. And Jeff, you had said that earlier as well, of saying it's so much fun when you kind of get to go back and look, oh, what I did there, I'm always trying to do something different and push the envelope different for myself, which is why I asked the question, or rather, thank you, Kaitlin, for reading, because otherwise everybody on the train would be mad at me. Like, so I have a question. No, of saying when you run into these issues that you're not really familiar with, I think what's really cool about being a producer is you kind of get to wear all hats and obsessively learn at least a little bit about every single aspect of what goes into making it, not necessarily needing to be an expert on it, but being able to understand and divulge the language of what a writer is and a director and an actor does, and, you know, kind of understanding all of that aspect. So yeah, it was, I guess I didn't even really have a question. I just wanted to make sure that anybody who's like jumping in here watching this, who either comes at it from a hobbyist perspective or somebody who's just getting in there, like, we may be talking about all kinds of crazy stuff. Obviously, like, Jeff's on an insane schedule, you know, like I don't even know how you do it, man. Like, truthfully, I do not, because I take my sweet ass time with my show. Sorry, excuse me. I don't know if there's language barriers there. I take my sweet time, you know, developing my show. And you know, I don't worry about that, but I know, like, for other people, they don't. And I just think it's encouraging that you guys can come in here and show your very, very strong knowledge of expertise, you know, in a very casual way. So, but I also just wanted to reinforce that, like, to anybody who's like jumping in here from the beginning, I think at one point we all had no idea what we were doing. And
Absolutely.
it's really fun to develop and kind of see where you're going. Because obviously all of us are artists. We're all our own worst critic, right? Nobody's going to tear our work apart more than we will, no matter what trolls or whatever are saying online. Yeah, I wanted to make sure that everybody understand, like, everything that has been discussed is not some gift from a higher power. All of this can be learned. And what you're really developing is taste. What is your taste? And what are you learning from that? And I think that's really kind of like one of the most exciting things about this platform is you have everybody, some people who've never used a microphone in their entire life, and now they're developing all these crazy stuff. You don't have to be a professional in any of these aspects. You learn as you keep going on. So anyways,
yeah, and you have to want to keep learning and keep exploring, even in your free time, when you know, like, if you're really passionate about it, just sit around and watch YouTube videos on compression or, you know, really boring stuff, or how they did a sound design for this one film or something like that. You know, I find typically a lot of people I interact with, we all like movies. That seems to be the common delimiter between everybody. We consume them. Some of us are more rabid than others, but basically we all kind of pay attention to what they do, and we're like, I wonder how they did that, or wonder if I could take that and try doing that here or something like that. And so there's a lot of learning just from consuming things and listening to things and watching things, reading, you know, for sure. And I'm not going to say that I'm any kind of success, but I will say that I'm at least living proof that you can do this without having any actual education on it. It's all I learned through YouTube. I learned through doing it. I learned through talking to people who knew a little bit more than I do, and failing a lot and learning a little bit each day. And I wouldn't necessarily call myself any kind of an expert, but I could say that I've at least had a lot of experience at this point. And ultimately that's all that really matters, is that you just keep trying.
Yeah, and I mean, it's a bit of a cliche, but I mean, learning through your mistakes is like totally a real thing. It's not even don't be afraid to make mistakes, just understand that you will, like always. I was able to come into the phenomenon already having worked as a producer for a number of years, so I already understood what, you know, a producer's role was supposed to be. You know, over the years of learning that, you don't take the easiest path. You don't know the shortcuts in Pro Tools. You know, you do things the hard way a lot of times before you figure out the easy way. And then even when you think you know how to do things, you don't, because things change, and creativity isn't a process that's just something that you can learn and then you're just good at it forever. That's not how it works. So even when you kind of know the logistical side of things, the more you do, the more mistakes you'll make. And, you know, sometimes there's beauty in those mistakes. And if there's not, then it's definitely a learning experience, you know? So I would say that even, you know, when you get to a point where it feels like you know what you're doing, or if people look at others and say, wow, they've got it all figured out, it's like, hey, everybody, even the people at any level of any process, are still making mistakes all the time. There are things with the phenomenon that didn't come out exactly the way we had planned. There's some things that we wish had sounded different, or wish we had approached a different way. And, you know, those are lessons that we learn and take with us to the next season and the next project.
Definitely. And like, I'm 170 productions deep into No Sleep right now, and that's just No Sleep. And I learned like a key time-saving thing the other day with my tool set, where it's like, holy crap, I didn't even know I could do that and I just stumbled upon a video on YouTube, and it's like, oh crap, that would have saved me a bunch of hours. So, you know, you just explore.
And that's especially true with, you know, the truly creative side of things, you know, directing, acting, things like that. You can have directing and acting experience, but nobody's ever really totally figured that out. You know, everybody, even if you've directed a ton of things, you still walk onto a set or into a booth thinking like, I have no idea what to tell to this person to get the best performance, and just kind of have to figure it out. And I'm sure the same is true with a lot of actors too. You might have acted a ton and you're still going to give bad performances. So in terms of the logistics parts, there's ways that we can make that stuff easier, but especially in the creative parts, nobody ever really truly has it figured out.
Absolutely. And if you get the chance to do a podcast where you're collaborating with others, the sheer amount of power you get from the act of collaborating is huge. It's everything for our show. We wouldn't exist without it being a collaborative effort. It just wouldn't be possible. And the amount of benefit that gives to the show as a whole, because ideas get tossed around and new things are tried, and you can trust your fellow contributors to do X, Y, and Z, you know, and take risks and things like that. One-man show is a tough thing to do, and I admire anybody who does it. I tried doing it on my YouTube channel, and it's tough because you get so much more enrichment with being able to work with others.
Yeah, there's so much strength in collaboration. Obviously, because, you know, more people will have better ideas than just one person sometimes. But when you truly can kind of lean into that collaboration, you can really elevate a project. I try to approach things when I'm directing or producing. I try to think about things as not where the best idea comes from, but what the best idea is. And it's not about if I came up with something. An actor could have come up with something. Anybody could have come up with something. You know, but if whoever says it, whatever the best idea is in the spirit of true collaboration, go with that. You know, like you said, Jeff, in your presentation, managing egos, there's no room for that. And I think if everyone can honestly leave their ego at the door and truly collaborate with each other and be open to accepting other people's ideas, that's when the cream really rises to the top, and you can elevate something to even what you kind of in a direction that you didn't anticipate it going.
So on that, actually, I did make a note, and I kind of wanted to wonder, Jared, you were talking in your presentation early on about pre-production and how this is essentially where you're generating questions for every possible scenario, kind of troubleshooting before the trouble happens. And I wanted to know kind of how critical collaboration is on that side of things.
It's critical because there's going to be always a ton of questions that you're going to have that you can't generate answers to yourself. You know, when you're preparing things for post, preparing things for production, you can only wear so many hats and you can only have so many skill sets. Ultimately, there are going to be things that you don't have the answers to, you know, so it's about seeking out those people, making sure that you find people that you trust that have these answers that can help you prepare in the way that you need to prepare. You know, because I would say if you're in pre-production and you answer all the questions you have and you have all the answers to them, you're probably forgetting things, because that collaboration needs to extend into that process to make sure you're getting all the information that you need.
And what does that look like? Does that mean that you're sitting kind of in a room, like a writer's room or something like that, and you're going through some things, or is that kind of happening more in a spontaneous for you historically?
I would say that it doesn't really look like anything. Like it's a process rather than an event. You know, it's because constantly as you're going through things, you're going to, you know, when you're in the middle of the night laying in bed, you're going to think, oh, I need to do this, or I need to think about this. And so it's a constant process of figuring out where those holes are and thinking about what you might be forgetting. And I'm constantly asking myself, you know, have I really thought of everything, and driving down into the details? Because in pre-production, the devil's in the details in terms of if you forget some little specific thing, that's where you're going to get caught up on it. So it's not as much about getting people in a room and hashing it out. It can be like that sometimes for certain parts of it, but the general larger picture of it is just a process of kind of taking it along, and as you have things you need to figure out, finding people that can give you the information that you need.
So we are nearing the end of our time. I try to keep these things under 3 hours, but if you put a bunch of podcasters together, I guess we just really want to talk. So I think I saw that Colton had his hand raised a little while ago, and I didn't want to skip over him. So we're going to have you do the last discussion prompt, and then we're going to bring it all to an end.
Yeah, this is actually just sort of touching on two earlier questions. First, to Rochelle's question about can visualization trip you up? Just the one like pitfall we had, especially with magical history, is realizing that you really have to write the script with the final mix in mind, because there are some things that are infinitely easier to convey in script format than they are to convey in an actual audio edit. We started to get in the habit of, we all came from like a screenwriting background, so we were using slug lines for a while, which is a horrible pitfall because they introduce you to the space you are in a way that audio cannot instantaneously do. And in a similar format, we stopped writing like, he tackles this character, and started writing just like the list of sound effects we would think we would play to make sure that other people reading would be like, oh yeah, that's the sound of tackling someone, and that kind of thing. The second was, Kaitlin, you had mentioned, or asked rather, if there was a place to find sound designers and mixers. I just wanted to give a shout out to castingcall.club is normally a voice acting website, but in the past few months, I think they've added categories for recruiting artists and writers and sound mixers and a few other things. We found a ton of amazing people there for still lives. And also Will Williams' Podcast Problems has an awesome audio drama help wanted page that can find a lot of great people.
Yeah, I would say to your first point about sound design, don't underestimate what's possible to be conveyed through sound design alone. This was a decision at the time, at the very, very beginning of Phenomenon. I made the decision to go without narrator. So it was really, everything was on voice performances and sound design. And knowing that at the beginning of the writing process was great, because like you said, being able to approach the script with that sound design in mind was very helpful. But it also led to a lot of instances where there was information that I needed to communicate to the audience, and without a narrator, there really wasn't a good way to do it, or I should say an easy way to do it. And that led to a lot of just thinking about what elements can we write in here that don't sound too expository with the dialogue, but that really kind of lean on the sound design, use that stuff to our advantage, and always kind of found a solution there. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with narrators and narrators setting the stage. But I would say with a little kind of, with really thinking about it, there is a lot that can be accomplished via sound design, because sound is how audiences and everyone experience so much of the world, that it's really, a wonderful way to convey information if you're able to think about it creatively.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that I really admired about the White Vault was they definitely did that. They got by using pure sound design for so much, but if there were ever a moment where things were just a little too hectic, they did the old audio radio play thing of expository dialogue, but they did it, but it was so cleverly and deftly done because of the format of the show. You have so many characters who can talk to each other as opposed to talking to themselves and stuff like that, that they would very, very subtly shore up whatever you just heard. If there was a huge cacophony of sound, they'd be like, what was that thing? Oh, I saw this, it looked like it was coming out of the water and stuff. And it's like, oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. Cause I heard a lot of splashing, but I wasn't quite sure what happened. So like, it was very transparently done, and they only employed it when it absolutely necessary, because they had trust in their audience. And I commend you guys for doing that. And I sound like a fanboy, and I totally am, but I could also got the impression, I have not had a huge amount of listening time with your show, Jared, but from the couple episodes that I listened to, you did the same thing, where it was just a huge amount of trust in the audience and what they can interpret. So
I'm personally, thank you so much. I'm personally a huge trust the audience person.
Yeah.
And I would rather have the audience be lost a little bit and kind of
assume they're stupid.
Yeah, over explain what's going on.
Yeah.
So thank you. Yeah, that's kind of, we always kind of lean in that direction. But yeah, you're right. There are screenwriting tools that you can use to your advantage, like putting someone on the phone with someone, so they have to explain what's going on because the other person can't see, or things like that. That let you use expository dialogue in a way that doesn't feel forced. There's nothing wrong with expository dialogue, but it shouldn't be used at a time when people wouldn't naturally say that. That's when it feels forced. That's when it feels wrong. But you would tell someone that you were talking to on the phone what you were seeing, so that doesn't feel, those are good tools and tricks to kind of go back to when you really need to get something across.
Yeah.
All part of the collaboration.
Yeah.
But all right, I think we're going to end it there because we're just under the 3-hour mark.
Great.
And thank you all for coming, and thank you too for giving your presentations. And just like you were saying earlier, I hope that somebody sits down and watches a 3-hour YouTube video on the production of audio drama podcasting and the logistics of podcasting. And hopefully this can help other people and help the people who arrived as well. So thank you for coming. And if you watch this later on YouTube, thank you for watching. Good night, everyone. Travis is going to end the recording pretty soon. Thank you all
for having us.
Thank you for putting this together. This was wonderful.